So, hi everyone, my name is Aga Wilson, and this is the first episode of Changemakers. And I'm super honored to be here with David Martin. David, I have actually tried to interview you before, but you're very hard to get a hold of.
And here I am on my way to the airport in Brussels. Who knew?
I caught you, last second. No, but it's really an honor just because, I know you've been a leading voice in this movement for some time now, and especially during the COVID pandemic. And it's really interesting because you have a completely different angle. Well, maybe just introduce yourself first and a little bit about your background would be great.
Yeah. I mean, it's funny when people say, what am I? My only response is I live. Because the truth is that ever since I was very young, I look at the world a very different way. So, my official credentials are in medicine and engineering and sciences and everything else. So I was on the faculty in the radiology orthopedic surgery department, ran the clinical trials program for the University of Virginia back in the 90s. And I've done a number of the things that are the official credentialed part of my bio. But then I also, have done a lot of things that are not officially part of a credential, but it's part of my life, which is for a decade I ran the United States' Treaty Restricted Technology Transfer Program, which is, if you've ever watched a James Bond movie, it's going into the labs of the ultra villains of the world and finding technologies and finding ways to bring them out as civilian technologies. So I did that for 10 years in the late 80s and early 90s, and what I've done is I've always seen the world through the lens of the what if. What if we applied humanity to the thing that we're doing? We've adopted a world, certainly since electricity, that has driven us into this pathway of saying everything has to go through this consensus utility, whether it's electronics or telecommunications or whatever else, which is fine. It has achieved certain outcomes, but the problem is we've come to see the world through this very narrow lens. And so my whole life has been about going, yeah, what if you didn't put it through a narrow lens? What if you expanded the view? What if you expanded your experience? And that worldview has obviously had its impact in education, where I was, I've been faculty all over the world, but it's also had its impact in business, because one of the things that I did very uniquely, beginning in the 1990s, is I was able to bring the worlds of technology and finance together in a way that nobody had done that before. So, in 1998, my company MCAM was started globally as the first and still the only company that allows innovation to be used in traditional banking. And so, our impact has been trillions of dollars of transactions around the world. We set up the CNBC IQ 100 index, which is now the leading market indicator for the world. These are all things that we do because we look at the world a different way. So everything comes from the only credential that I really have is I've had so many different experiences and so many different perspectives that I can look at a thing and go, oh, that reminds me of that, and then that reminds me of that, and I just put pieces together.
Yeah, absolutely, and I have a little bit of that kind of experience too. Just to have done incredibly many things in my life, and I started out working at the UN actually.
Oh, right.
So I was there for many years and politics and things like that. Accidentally happened to become a journalist. It was not a plan of mine. But there's just so many things that I've done, and it gives you like that experience of knowing many things and being able to compare, right? So it's actually a really nice thing to have. But going back to the beginning of the pandemic, or actually first I would like to ask you, like when did you actually sort of wake up or saw that things are maybe not as you thought they would be, or as you learned in school?
Well, so I had a very untraditional childhood, so I don't think I had the falling asleep part, because I was never allowed to do that. So the waking up piece, what I would say is that I always point to 1986 is when I really knew that the system as it's currently constructed is fundamentally and irreparably harmed. I was in Central America during the war, Nicaragua and Costa Rica, and it was very clear in about 5 nanoseconds that we were not fighting for freedom and liberty and anything, and we weren't fighting against communism. This was a giant cover operation to actually build the drug trade into the United States and profiteer from that so that we could actually do corrupt acts all over the world. And it took pretty much no time at all to figure that out. Now, at the time I was, in university and kind of starting to think about what I was going to do with my life, I thought I was going to get into traditional medicine. That was the trajectory I was on. I was, working in emergency medicine during the war. So those things were the things I did every day. But the actual experience of being down there and seeing the government lie all of the time. There wasn't a single thing that the United States government was saying that was true. We weren't fighting who we said we were fighting. We weren't looking for the drug dealers we were saying we were looking for. We were meeting with them, and we were doing deals with them, and we were sending arms to the arms hostages thing, and all of the stuff that took place in the 80s. All of those things were going on, and what you knew was that an institution that can only survive by lying to its alleged populace is an institution that will fail. And so I knew, coming back from Central America, that there was no chance I was ever going to fit into whatever convention was. And it's one thing to know that you don't fit. It's another thing to try to figure out where you're ultimately going to go. So what I would say is from 1986 to probably kind of 1995, 1996, I tried to see if I could credential my way into making a difference on the inside. So got my doctorate, joined the faculty of the University of Virginia, did all of the things to be credentialed. And in 1996, I had this wonderful moment where I had a lot of grants that I had received. I was a young professor, had a lot of grants. I went to my department chair in radiology, and I said, I want to do more teaching because I'm doing a huge amount of research. I'm getting tons of grants. I want to do more teaching. And he looked at me and he said, you're an idiot. He goes, people would kill to be independent of the obligations to teach. And I said, well, the only reason I'm in a university is to teach. That's why I'm here. He said, if I'm not teaching, I'm not going to be staying. And he looked at me and goes, nobody would be dumb enough to leave. And I literally left his office, packed up my office, and that was the last day I was on the faculty. And I look at that moment as this giant kind of watershed moment in my life, because I tried to credential myself. I tried to play the game the way the game was rigged. And that moment for me is the moment I was like, nah, I'm out. And I have never, ever looked back. 1996, packing up my office was the last act of compliance that I was ever going to do. And it was the ultimate act of defiance, and I walked away. And and it is that knowingness that there are systems that you can try to fix from the inside, and then there's also systems that are so designed for their own failure that if you stay in them, they're going to kill you. So get out 100%. And do your own thing.
100%. I felt like that when I was in the UN, at the UN, and I'm so happy where I am today that I like you, I will never look back.
Yeah.
But it's a great experience, right? Because everything that I learned from there, I'm using today.
And that's the thing. I mean, listen, I was a young, somewhat brash, I would say very arrogant person. I think there are people who would still say that about me now, but at least I've tempered it a bit, I guess. But the fact of the matter is, I needed a credential because I was doing a lot of business in Japan. When you're in your 20s and you're talking to business leaders in Japan, they don't take you seriously unless you have titles behind your name. And if you have absolutely. Dr. David Martin and Professor David Martin, then all of a sudden you've got the credential that gets you in the room where you wouldn't be in the room otherwise. Exactly. So it's not that it didn't have value. It did. But the fact of the matter, it was a game. And the game is not worth playing because there's nothing to win at the end of it.
No.
And that's the reason why it's so easy to critique it and really disparage it is the truth. I look at my official academic and medical and all the other credentials and I kind of go, whatever. My credential is I live.
Yeah, absolutely. So I know yesterday you spoke a lot about like when this actually started because we were at the European Parliament yesterday. We were talking about the COVID situation, the pandemic, and everything behind it. So, and you were talking about how it all started, and it started so much earlier. So
in 1965, and I would go as far as to say it started in 1953, because when we adopted a model of life that said life is going to be digitized into what we call DNA, objectively, that's as dumb as saying that if I go into your pantry and I see that you have flour, that means you must be a bread maker. Ingredients do not make the bread.
Yeah.
People who know how to use ingredients make the bread. DNA doesn't exist in nature. It's ingredients. Chromosomes exist. Cells exist. That's what exists. DNA doesn't. So everything derived from that, whether we call it, RNA, DNA, whether we call it protein synthesis, those are all models that go back to 1953. And if we look at the reality, we should say that the minute we decided to digitize life, that's probably when the pandemic started. But in 1965, when we decided to say we isolated coronavirus, which up until then was just a thing associated with the common cold, when we started saying, well, hold on a minute, this is a thing we can start messing with, and a year later, we begin the process of manipulating it. We find out that we can manipulate it, and then we can start putting it into different organisms and watch it change and watch it become more pathogenic. The gain of function on coronavirus certainly was full in hand by 1967, 56 years ago. And Rand Paul thinks gain of function started in 2015 or 2014 or whatever else. No, 1967, 1968. That's where we should be looking at coronavirus gain of function research beginning. And by 1990, the industrial complex of coronavirus was full in hand. Pfizer doesn't file a vaccine patent in 1990 on coronavirus vaccine if it's not intending to make money on it. Right? And then we jump forward, and every single one of the moments where we look at 2002, 2003, when we actually move into this period of time when Anthony Fauci says, well, hold on a minute, coronavirus, because it's such a malleable model, should be a vaccine vector. And most people don't even understand what that means, but it means using the pathogen itself as the agent of delivering a vaccine. And he thought that was the brilliant idea of the universe, so he was going to pursue that dream. But here's the problem. When you decide to hijack a model derived from nature, and you amplify its pathogenicity, you make it more dangerous so that it does its job better because you want it to be a technology, there's probably a lot of things you haven't thought about. Like, could that possibly go wrong? Could it possibly go wrong to weaponize nature against humanity? Has that ever, showed up as a bad idea before?
Yeah.
Right, and we think very simply. We can look outside. We can think about invasive species where somebody decides, oh, I'm going to plant bamboo where it doesn't belong. And suddenly the whole forest is taken over by bamboo. Or somebody goes, oh, I'm going to just put this little roadside weed that came out of Southeast Asia. And suddenly every forest is being pulled down by the vines that aren't contained because there's no natural predation and there's no natural control of them. We can think about it when we think about those macro systems. But we don't apply the same thought to, I wonder what could possibly go wrong. For example, if we use Bacillus thuringiensis to modified seed crops, when in the early 1900s, the Japanese knew that if you put Bt toxin into any food, it causes gastrointestinal leakage. That was known in 1905. And we wonder why we have so much problems with colitis and we have so much problems with diverticulitis. We have all of these problems with our gastrointestinal system, but in 1905 we knew that Bacillus thuringiensis was a toxin to the gut. Yeah. And we have now decided to use that toxin for every single cereal grain in the food supply.
Among,
is there any
so many others.
Possibility that might go wrong? Yeah. Right? This is the problem. The problem is we're using the technology of nature. We're looking through the lens of how do we exploit it.
Yeah.
But when you take that approach, nature, by its nature, will do what it does, which is it will comply. And the fact is, the reason why we have 40 or 50% of the population with gastrointestinal problems is because we did it to ourselves by hijacking a natural model, which was fully contained before 1905. And it was so dangerous that the Japanese actually critiqued it as a biological weapon. But now we're eating it every day.
And many others, but too.
Unbelievable,
so
right? This is but this is the point. We're taking what could be a natural thing and we're deciding to weaponize it. And we did that with coronavirus.
But how do these toxins pass? I mean, today I'm looking at all the ingredients list all the time when I buy food, and you find so many. So it's very hard for me, but I eat very clean to go into a store and buy food.
Yep.
traveling and all this stuff. But I'm just, it's mind blown by how this can pass. And
well, but remember
hundreds.
that once upon a time we were given the illusion that whether you're in Europe, whether you're in the States, that we have these oversight agencies that are supposed to be food security or drug security or whatever else. So the FDAs and the EMEAs and all these things. But here's the problem. Each one of those things is a captive agency that is beholden to the corporations that pay the user fees. And back in the 1980s, it was very popular for these quasi-public institutions to become user fee driven. And this is as old as at least 2,000 years of wisdom.
Yeah.
That says, you know, give unto Caesar who's Caesar's. Well, outside chance. If you have a captive agency that is, I don't know, in the business of selling sugar or selling artificial sweeteners or selling, you know, skincare products or selling anything else, is there any possibility that the people who are paying for that agency to regulate them are going to get the benefit of the agency that they're paying for? These are things where if the public knew that the whole system was hijacked, they wouldn't believe there was consumer protection, they would believe there's corporate protection. And that system is a system that's broken, and it's a system that we need to reform.
Yeah, absolutely. So looking at the bigger picture, because, you know, we've had COVID, and I kind of feel like most people think, oh, COVID is over now.
Yeah.
You know? And so they're not really willing to protest anymore, do anything about it. We have the injured, but because it's so well hidden right now, you know, it's also not coming to the surface that there's so many people suffering out there, which, you know, we also have to be better at. But I'm thinking, like, looking at the bigger picture, what else is happening, like, according to you, that we have to focus on, or because there's so many things coming at us. So, like, if you could, like, just describe, like, your thoughts on that.
Yeah, well, I think that behavior modification was the real motivation behind the COVID pandemic. This was about a market test on how far society is willing to bend before it breaks. And the answer is we bend all the way. I mean, that's the answer. It's a terrible piece. It's a terrible piece of information to know, but it happens to have the inconvenience of being. That was the test that was done, and humanity failed the test. I mean, if we're scoring the score, it's a failed test. What that means is that we're now on this verge of an economic system that is being increasingly pressed into collapse, which, by the way, will be certainly collapsed by 2028. There's no way we survive the current economic system past 2028, and that's because the maturity of the short-term debt that's been issued by the United States and central banks in Europe comes due in 2028, and we don't have the money to cover it. That's the reason why currencies are currently racing away from the dollar and the euro, going into these other trade agreements, the BRICS countries, everything else. So we have an economic collapse, a social collapse, and the reason for that is there's an attempt to put people into a behavior social scored system that says that if you're approved, you have access to resources, you have access to opportunity, and if you're not approved, you don't. Well, the answer is you, me, probably a huge number of people watching this show are in the unapproved camp. That's great, because the efforts of COVID were to try to get everybody into the compliant bucket.
Yeah,
of course. A third of humanity said no. Another third of humanity was coerced into the bucket. But if they were actually given liberty, they would have never gone in the bucket.
Yeah.
Which means the minority of people are compliant.
Yeah.
And we have to come back to this over and over again, because the mainstream narrative is, well, most people went along and it was the fringe that didn't.
Yeah.
No. A third never did. A third were coerced into it. That tells me that the math is on our side, not their side. And we need to keep that message going. 67% of the world said hell no.
Yeah.
And only half of them were coerced with loss of job, loss of mobility, loss of whatever else. A third of them were coerced in to doing the compliance. But they won't be coerced again. And what we need to do is realize that it is the majority of us who actually said no.
Yeah.
And it will now be the majority of us who have to now stand together to say no to compliance, control, digital currency, management of our movement and our association and our consumption. All of those things are things we also have to say no to. And it's easy to do it, because all we have to do is have these kind of conversations and let people know that they're not alone, and they're not even in the small group. They're in the big group. Because big group identity allows you to have the courage to speak out and say, hey, I'm not alone. You're not alone. My wife, I'll give you an example. My wife last night sent the speech I did here at the EU Parliament to a bunch of people who we don't know. We didn't know kind of where they sat on the whole spectrum. New friends that we had just made in the last few weeks. To a person, everyone came back saying, oh my God, I can't believe that Dave said what he did. That's great. We're sending it to all of our friends, right? Now, we didn't lose a single person. And these are people we never had these conversations with. We met on vacation a couple weeks ago. Never once had a conversation about where they stood on the issue, right?
Yeah.
We sent she sent out the video, and all of them loved what I said and sent it to all their friends. Well, what does that tell me? That's a random sample of interesting people.
Yeah.
Just random. No idea what their backgrounds are. I don't know what their political affiliations are. I don't know anything other than they were lovely people. I had a wonderful time meeting them. Those people, 100% of them said, we're behind you. They sent it out to their friends. Now, how far is this thing going to go? I don't know, but what I do know is if 100% of a random sample of people who happen to meet at a resort all say, holy crap, we're on the same page. Holy crap, we're sending this to all of the people on the same page. That tells me we're not even close to alone.
Yeah,
out of all of the people who commented, and I had thousands of comments on the video of my speech yesterday, thousands of them, one person said he's controlled opposition, he's a Freemason, he's whatever else. One person said something negative. Thousands of people said beautiful things. What does that tell you?
No, I have to tell you, I
That's
had the same experience, kind of. I haven't been attacked yet, even talking on my show, and I feel that, there's a huge support out there. Even when I go out talk to people, because I live out in the country, in the woods, out of the city, and I even meet people there. And even if we don't meet on the COVID, theme, there's always something else because they're farmers, and they're being attacked from other angles, or they're worried about the economy or whatever it is. But people start seeing, that something is not right, that the politicians are not working for them anymore, that they don't have a voice, So my thing is always, and I think this is a huge problem for all of us that we're discussing, in the background, is how do we get the young people on board, because we don't have many of them, and they're the future. And I'm always, thinking about strategy, like how do we get them in? So do you have any thoughts or suggestions on that?
No question. One of the reasons why when I was on the faculty in the radiology department at the University of Virginia, I always lectured to kindergarten classes. And people sit there going, you taught radiology to kindergartners? And I said, yes, because it turns out that kindergartners can still have fun.
Yeah, they can.
It turns out we actually need to focus on where our energies are best applied. And it is actually not the confused millennial and or Gen X or whatever. I don't even know what the Gen is. It's not going after this confused population that has been trained to be confused by the TikToks and the Facebooks and the social medias and the Instagrams. It's to go after the younger generation. And by younger, I mean kindergarten, first grade, second grade. Where life can still be an adventure, where there still can be enthusiasm for learning things. We need to actually start addressing that community, and that's why I make the investment to do that. I speak to little kids, not to teenagers and early university. Listen, they're already in their programming, and they've already got all of their social pressures and everything else. We need to start early on. We need to have conversations that are authentic and genuine, and we need to not diminish that young mind. We need to increase our ability to know that we can make an impact. And so my goal is to stay and start super young, make it fun, talk about things in a way that makes it playful, have adventures, learn through the experience of activating all the 12 senses, which is something that I do a huge amount of work in, is to make sure that you are sensing the universe through every possible way you can sense the universe. And kids can do it when they are emancipated early in their life. If we try to unlearn them, where they have to stand alone when they're teenagers and peer pressure's all there, that's a tough mountain to climb. But if you get them young, then they're absolutely incapable of being restrained, and it is so much more effective. So that's why my focus is on the little ones. Because I think if we can make a difference there, then that propagates through the rest of their life, and that's what I think we all need to be focused on. I think we need to be focused on not overlooking the brilliance of a 3-year-old or a 4-year-old or a 5-year-old, because then that 5-year-old will not become the 18-year-old who's on their cell phone doing nothing but this.
Yeah, absolutely. But then, it's the school system is a very difficult thing. I moved back from the United States just now, and it's illegal with homeschooling. I felt terrible sending my son to school just because,
Oh, yeah.
it's such a they programmed them already there, and that's, I mean, everything is when you start seeing the world from the place we are right now, which probably happened to me 10 years ago, but or earlier, but it starts somewhere, right? But it's everything is literally broken.
Yeah.
And for us now, I think coming up with solutions to rebuild it, like when you think about the new world, or what we're going to shape and create, because I think that's where everyone is confused. What do you see?
Yeah, so it's a very simple thing. Civilization is based on sanitation.
Because?
Well, it turns out that if we can't live in proximity with each other, we can't have civilization. So the building block starts with something as simple as shit and water. And I say that genuinely.
Yeah.
I mean, we don't think the right way. We think of all the complexity out there rather than going, oh, let's look at the simple definitions. Look at a movie from the 13th, 14th century portrayal of London and tell me how much fun it would be to be walking past somebody dumping a pot of shit on your head in the morning on your way to work, right? That's a terrible idea. And we all know that's a terrible idea.
Yeah.
So we need to start with something that's very simple. How do we do sanitation? How do we do water? How do we teach people about what that is? Then how do we do nutrition, which is a very simple, everybody needs it, everybody should be engaged in it. How do we teach that? And how do we start putting sanitation and agriculture together? I don't know, civilization knew fertilizer once upon a time was fertilizer, right? Not chemistry, not everything else. We need to be building the building blocks of how civilization is in fact built. Because the thing that's hijacked us is the reliance on technology rather than an understanding of how systems work. And we need to go back to a systems approach.
Yeah.
So what I'm doing is I'm working with people on water and sanitation. I'm working with people on their own micro-agriculture. I'm working with people on their own micro-empowerment so that they have power to motivate themselves, move themselves, animate their houses, heat and cool their houses, all those things. What we're doing is saying that if we understand what it takes to do the core building blocks of what it means to be civilized, sanitation and water, nutrition, motivation, movement, energy. If we do those things and we actually teach people how to re-engage in those three parts of their own responsibility, then all of the rest of human possibility is there. And so what my wife and I do is we do workshops to get people back into all of the 12 senses. We teach people how to get back into their own self-reliance. And we've got thousands of people that go through the process and they never go back to the old way. It's not a hard thing to do. 4 days, and you're out of the system.
We have to get them to the workshop.
Yeah, but not ours. I mean, people have to just realize, you know how to solve the problem. All of us have it. We've been so conditioned to think that there's someone else. There's the person that controls the utility. There's the person who controls healthcare. There's the person who controls what's in our grocery stores. Well, stop that. That's a conscious decision. Make the conscious decision to step away and say, hold on a minute. How much of this can I control? I encourage people, seriously, pee outside once. Just get used to the idea that maybe a bush could use your urine as much as the septic system could. And it's fun. It's fun to play with that. Because we start playing with it, we start going, oh, yeah, that's kind of how humans used to do things, right? And so I'm not a Luddite. I don't think that technology should be rejected, but technology should be in service to a better human expression rather than humans formed into the shape that technology makes them. And we've got it all backwards. Now, the great news is it's easy to make it work again when you just change your thought process around it. And put the phone down, stop watching this, go outside. Do whatever it is to get yourself into this space of going, I can control this moment. And this moment, I'm going to do something that's in the analog reality of the real world.
Yeah.
And then I'm going to do another thing that's in the analog reality of the real world. And before long, you'll go, I like this world more than I like the virtual world.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, after moving out to the woods, I will never go back to the city.
Yeah.
That's for sure. So I think, just ending on a positive note, and because I really think it's amazing to have people like you inspire us, and do the work that you're doing. And I see that this world is becoming a better place every day when,
Yeah.
when we meet people like you, and we're doing what we're doing, and we're traveling the world. But something you want to share with the audience?
Yeah, I think that we're at a point in time, and this is a very precise moment in time, where we have to do a very active job in doing exactly what you and I are doing right now. Sitting together in analog proximity, not on a Zoom call,
Yeah.
not in some sort of digital, theoretically created environment. The ability to actually get back to human connection. I say in my film, American Revolution, at the end of the film, I talk about the importance of actually feeling that you are in the presence of another human being, feeling that you are in the presence of reality.
Yeah.
People think that I'm being metaphoric or poetic when I say that. I'm not saying that. I'm saying literally get back in proximity. The only way we can be controlled is if we put ourselves in isolation. So stop isolating. Get reconnected, get engaged, get back into contact with people. And the rest of it becomes very simple. Because anything that's not connection is ultimately a place where you can be hijacked. Every place you're connected, you can never be hijacked.
Yeah.
So that's the thing. Just stay connected.
100% agree. Thank you so much, David. And
Always
thank
a
you for
delight.
everything that you're doing, and hope to see you soon again.
Very good. Thank you.
Thank you.